There's nothing worse than sitting there with 2.5 hours to fill and some records and some handful of requests. And I think really that was the marvelous thing for me, that I could sit there and fantasize. That's, of course, the thing that drives me crazy about television. That's what I'm not able to do on television. You can't make pictures with television. Television makes the pictures for you. Television is a non-thinking medium. The viewer puts their brain into neutral when television comes on.
When you started doing this on radio, though, I mean, you say that you did it to fill in the 2 hours. You're sitting there with a pile of records. But there must have been some broadcasters who you were picking up on a little bit, or people who you'd listened to doing that sort of thing, perhaps, who'd influenced you. I don't know, I'm thinking about perhaps other DJs.
I don't think I was influenced by anybody. I did have a very clear idea. I'd done a lot of radio in Ireland, and I had a very clear idea of what I wanted to do. What I didn't want was sycophancy. I had listened in 67 and 68 to Radio 1 disc jockeys, and indeed they still do it, reading letters and cards saying, "Dear Charlie, I think you're absolutely wonderful. I love your show and count the hours lost, not spent in your sparkling company." Now, human beings do not talk like that to each other, not in the real world. And what I was trying to do is achieve that kind of mutual abrasion that goes on between friends or between intimates. And I think, as I said, of using radio for what it actually is designed for. That is fantasy and imagination and the creation of word pictures and the use of words, which I love. Again, I have worked on television, on shows, and I've known very well that the director has not listened to a single word I've said. And words are terribly important on television, but really, you try and convince anybody here that that's the case. It's about making pictures.
You used to get those lovely free association runs, didn't you? I mean, like after you'd played Poetry in Motion, you'd come out with Keats on casters and Wordsworth on wheels or something. I mean, that you almost like seem to be in a bit of a stream of consciousness. I'm not trying to turn you into James Joyce, but it used to be almost seamless in a way.
That's right, and I deliberately didn't think about it. I actually want to make it up as I go along, with the pauses. And if necessarily with the ums and ahs, but not too many of those. I'm a great believer in the pause on radio. I think you must allow people time to think. But you must get it right. It mustn't be a second too long, or everybody think, the set's broken. Quick, go to Droitwich National.
Do you listen to the radio now?
Yes, I do. Yes, I do. I listen to the radio in the car. I listen to the radio in the morning when I get up. And I love radio. You see, radio is my first love. Radio is the medium for me, really, and probably the medium that I'm best at. But your career tends to take you in different areas, and I tended to feel that 12 years was probably enough for the great British public to have to suffer.
When you're listening to the radio now, is there anybody, I'm thinking of, say, people like John Peel, perhaps, whose people sometimes refer to in similar terms to yourself as having that intimate contact with a special sort of audience. Are the people you hear who you like particularly because they seem to be doing the sort of thing that you did? I
like people who use words. I like people who sound as if they've made the words up as they're going along. And I do like John Peel for that reason. He has a lovely turn of phrase and a nice sense of humor. He always has. He's unafraid. It's about not being afraid. It's about having enough confidence to take the chance and knowing that you can carry the audience with you. Now, Ray Moore, I think, is a splendid example. I love listening to Ray Moore. I've always listened to Ray Moore for years. I had to listen to Ray Moore because he was there in front of me in the morning. I had to look at the back of his neck and listen to this smoke-filled voice. By the time I would get in at around about 7 o'clock, he would already have done for about 50 senior service or whatever coffin nail he happened to be smoking at.
I thought it was Park Drive.
Park Drive, yes, even worse. Even worse. Yeah, you'd walk into Ray's studio before the fog was extraordinary. But he's a good example of somebody who uses words and dredges up phrases from his Liverpool background. And that's what I did. I dredged up phrases from my granny and from I would hear in the streets. And it didn't matter that a British public didn't necessarily understand the references. I think that's terribly important in broadcasting, that you don't feel that you have to dot every I and cross every T, that you can say something and that maybe only if one person understands it, then you've made the contact and they feel, I'm the only one who understands that. And they feel good about it, but you shouldn't be afraid. You shouldn't always think in terms of lowest common denominator. I can't say that because 60% of the audience won't understand it. If you start doing that, you're dead.
Do you feel that because when you wove that fantasy world around Broadcasting House and the DG, that you must have taken a lot of listeners in with you, and they must have written to you in terms of that fantasy, so it's
yes.
almost as though, I suppose, you've lost touch with that, and that those letters must be a little bit of a loss.
They are. That is an enormous loss. I mean, there were some tremendously talented people. To give you an example of the kind of stream of consciousness or fantasy that used to be carried forward, I remember I came across an item about this fella who had swum the channel both ways and claimed that he fell asleep halfway across. Now, I put the point, I thought quite reasonably, that you cannot swim and be asleep. You sink. Because your arms are not moving and neither are your legs, and you sink to the bottom like a stone if you're asleep, which soon wakes you up. And this fella said, I can claim to have done something better than that. He said, I actually covered myself in goose grease and ran down the M4 while tied to a lamppost. They just took it an extra dimension, took the thing further forward, and that was wonderful. Things like the Northampton Lighthouse, and extraordinarily, and weather forecasting ducks. The very thought of it, even now, the people's ingenuity. Bob Monkhurst once said about me, the only person who actually got these people to write my script for me for the radio for nothing, and then put the letters in a book and sold it at a profit.